I don't mean to be talking down to the honourable member across the way, because I wouldn't do that, but the courts make decisions which then come back to Parliament so that we can review the decisions that we've made on legislation to see whether further amendments are needed. And this is a case where we are getting a court saying to us that there are further amendments needed, and we are agreeing with them and going forward with C7 so that we can make the amendments to try to satisfy also the needs of the court.
Déclaration des députés. Statements by members. The honourable member for Sydney, Victoria. The honourable member for Sydney, Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, during this time of COVID crisis, when many of us have been doing our part to socially distance, we have found solace and comforts in the arts. Music, poetry, television, literature, they have all become more meaningful in this challenging time, offering escape and relief. Artists have and always been the first to stand up and volunteer their talents for a good cause. But now, as many artists struggle, we need to step up and give them our support. On that note, I'd like to highlight the amazing performances of Celtic Colours Music Festival, which celebrates Cape Breton's living Celtic culture and artistic partnerships. The Celtic tradition of music, dance, and storytelling lives on through this festival, which has come to be a celebration of Cape Breton's island's living culture. This year, the festival was made free to stream by all Canadians. Celtic Colours speaks to the resilience of our musicians, of their love of the craft in difficult times, and their willingness to support the communities even when they're facing their own hardships. I'd like to commend them and ask all Canadians to do their part and support the local artist whenever and wherever they can. Thank you.
The honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
Mr. Speaker, this week is Small Business Week in Canada. It is a time to highlight and celebrate what small businesses and entrepreneurs are doing for our country to make our lives better and our economy stronger. Yet 2020 has been a real challenge for small businesses, with COVID-19 proving to be as much a financial crisis as a health crisis. Yet despite all those challenges, entrepreneurs across the country are stepping up to the challenge, including people in my riding who I've had the honor of visiting recently. I'm thinking of Amy at Wildflower Styling and Company, Samantha at Oxygen Yoga and Fitness, Julia at the Bone and Biscuit, Stephanie at Matu's Coffee and Tea. These people are standing up to the challenge. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your determination. Please keep leading the charge. Thank you.
Honourable member for Etobicoke Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, Winston said we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. Today I rise to honour two Canadians for what they have given. Recently, James and Louise Temerty donated $250 million to the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine through their foundation. This donation is the largest ever to a Canadian university. The Temerty Foundation gift will support advances in machine learning, in medicine, in biomedical research, commercialization and entrepreneurship, equity and accessibility in medical education, the creation of a new state-of-the-art Faculty of Medicine building, and much more. James Temerty was born in Ukraine and came to Canada as a child after World War II. From humble beginnings, he has built a very successful entrepreneurial and business career. James and Louise have been generous philanthropists for many years, giving to a range of causes, including the Royal Ontario Museum, the Royal Conservatory of Music, Sick Kids Hospital, Sunnybrook Foundation, and much more. James and Louise, on behalf of our community and all Canadians, I'd like to thank you for the difference that you've made in the lives of countless Canadians and people around the world. I'd like to thank you for what you have given.
L'honorable député du Lac-Saint-Jean.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Recently, I participated in a webinar on the shameful way that Canadian mining companies have behaved towards people living in the Cordillera region of the Philippines and towards activists defending people in the area. I was there to explain what a parliamentarian can do in this kind of situation, and both of us saw the same things. Everywhere in the world, because of COVID, there are regimes and companies which are working together and which are very happy that their abuses are not being spoken of, and that in Canada, here, we're ignoring what they're doing. It is more urgent than ever that Parliament do more to hold these companies accountable and punish them. Canada cannot be a port of convenience for these multinationals. As parliamentarians, we need to do more to denounce the horrible acts committed under our flag. It's unacceptable, and it is not worthy of the people we represent.
The honourable member for Don Valley East. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Minister for Immigration for taking the input of MPs and bringing the necessary changes to expand the categories of travelers allowed into Canada. In my riding of Don Valley East, I've had numerous requests during the pandemic for compassionate and family reunification. The Minister has listened and is enabling spouses and fiancés to be reunited, people to visit their dying relatives, and allowing international students to come. With the safeguards that have been in place, we know that the importation of COVID-19 cases is less than 3%. I urge my constituents and everyone to check out the changes and note that we're not easing restrictions but are being compassionate. We are doing that in cooperation with the provinces and territories and keeping Canadians safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand, Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, for the past 16 years, I've had the honour of representing one of the best places to live in Canada. And boy, do we know how to celebrate. Haldimand, Norfolk hosts dozens of festivals, parades, and fall fairs, and multiple community suppers, fish fries, and barbecues. We even boast a Canada Day parade that has happened every year since Confederation. That is, until this year, Mr. Speaker, when organizers of these events were forced to make the difficult decision to either cancel or move to a virtual format. And while we couldn't see familiar faces at the fall fairs this year, I am looking forward to the future, Mr. Speaker, when we can come together, enjoy a Dixie dog, and personally get to see an entire parade from start to finish for the first time in 16 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. We seem to be having a bit of an issue there. We'll go on to the Honourable Member for Etobicoke North.
Mr. Speaker, October is Women's History Month in Canada, a time to learn about the lives of our great-grandmothers, grandmothers, mothers, and sisters, and their contributions to our communities and country. We should know the women who built our country, and we should learn about their history and achievements. And when history has erased women's contributions, we need to uncover them, share women's stories, and name unnamed women in archives and family photos because they have shaped Canada's history. We must tell the stories of women through school, post-secondary education, and beyond to ensure that they inspire this generation and the ones that follow. Let's recognize all women's contributions and celebrate every woman pioneer, trailblazer, and rule breaker who fought to take her rightful place, who fought for each hard-won right, and who continues to fight for a better today and tomorrow. We stand on the shoulders of giants.
L'honorable député de Richmond-Arthabasca.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are very good at lecturing us, but they're less good at taking action. The Prime Minister has done everything he can to avoid speaking about China, but the threat is serious, whether we're talking about Huawei, the illegal detention of the two Michaels, or the Chinese ambassador's bellicose statement regarding people fleeing Hong Kong. In each of these cases, the Prime Minister has chosen to do nothing. And what's even worse, he said, and I quote, that he admired the Chinese dictatorship. It is thus not surprising that this Prime Minister is using Canadians' money to support infrastructure projects in China instead of promoting projects here in Canada. Mr. Speaker, it's high time to stand up to China. Otherwise, we are weakening Canada and its economy during this pandemic. And otherwise, if we don't address China, we're showing the international community that Canada is weak and vulnerable. Canadians deserve better.
L'honorable député de Hull-Aylmer.
The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer.
L'honorable député de Hull-Aylmer, vous êtes en sourdine? Vous êtes en sourdine?
You're on mute.
OK. Nous allons continuer, puis ensuite retourner.
We'll go on and then come back to you.
Member for London West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Recently, I had the pleasure to join in the celebration of one of my oldest constituents, Mr. George Beardshaw, who turned 97 last month. Because of the pandemic, traditional festivities had to be changed, but the warmth, generosity, and love inspired by George was abundantly clear. A classic car tribute 5 blocks long had been organized by his loved ones while the drivers honked a happy birthday. George has led an amazing life. At the age of 18, he joined the Queen's Own Rifles to fight in the Second World War to help liberate Europe. He was also part of the Home Child program, where orphaned and impoverished children from the UK were sent to Canada. As we know now, the children were often used as cheap labor on farms and in private homes. The 115,000 home children who came to Canada, like George, have given so much to their adopted country. I know my colleagues will join me in wishing George, a veteran of so much, the happiest of birthdays in these most difficult of times. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, women are the majority of those unemployed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, an issue that hasn't gone unnoticed by the Status of Women's Committee. Recently, the committee learned of the numerous negative impacts women have faced because of the Liberal government's failure to follow through with their commitment that all programs and funding will go through a gender-based analysis. Unfortunately, because of this Prime Minister's latest ethical lapse in judgment, we were not able to present our report and recommendations to the government to help address and alleviate their concerns and to find ways to get women back into workforce. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are looking for stability and leadership, and women cannot afford to wait while the Liberals continue to play political games. Canadians can be assured that under a Conservative government, we will continue to put forward constructive ideas and solutions in addressing the impacts of COVID-19 on women here in Canada. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in this age of heightened tension, it is more important than ever that leaders stick to the facts and don't peddle misinformation. Conspiracy theories undermine confidence in democratic institutions and in the ability of people to influence the direction of our politics. While it's fair to disagree with authority figures, believing that those authority figures are controlled by a global cabal of lizard people undermines the possibility of effective democratic discourse. And frankly, anyone who's seen government up close knows that conspiracy theories vastly overestimate the competence of government. That is why I was so disturbed to hear the Prime Minister's hand-picked Liberal candidate in Toronto Centre has tweeted about what really happened on September 11, 2001. Bill Morneau must be rolling in his political grave. The 9/11 attacks were carried out by al-Qaeda, not by the U.S. government, Elvis, or the people who faked the moon landing. At a time when our relationship with the United States is becoming increasingly challenging, this isn't going to make matters any better. The Prime Minister has to explain why he thought it was appropriate, especially at a time like this, to appoint a candidate who has a history of using her public platform to lend credence to conspiracy theories.
The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, the fiscal stabilization program must be overhauled to get money to provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador suffering from serious loss of revenue. Becoming a have province has been great for Newfoundland and Labrador. We became so because of the oil revenues and royalties and the many thousands of workers and their families earning good incomes and living better lives because of it. It also meant we no longer qualified or required payments under the equalization, the constitutionally mandated program to address inequities between the provinces. But equalization doesn't help the sharp dip in revenues experienced by oil-producing provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador, Alberta and Saskatchewan, recently exacerbated by the downturn in markets due to the pandemic. The fiscal stabilization program is aimed at that, but it needs to be retooled and upgraded with funding sufficient to address the serious financial crisis facing these provinces. The Liberal government needs to step up now and fix the income stabilization program to provide the needed help.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In my riding, there is a unique, essential organization which is celebrating its 15th anniversary this year, Cancer Fermont. This is an organization that helps people in Fermont living with cancer and helps their families by offering them warm, direct support, both money and human support, in order to reduce their daily stressors. Under the leadership of founder Denis Gagné, the entire team works on a volunteer basis all year. Over the last 15 years, they have gathered over $750,000 for the community in order to bring people together, but also to allow people to have their dreams come true. And so I would like a similar organization to exist throughout the Côte-Nord and Quebec to help our communities. I'd like to say thank you to Marlène, Caroline, Angèle, and everyone who is working for the success of this organization. Happy 15th anniversary. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, yesterday hundreds of us marched together in the streets of Wendake. We were all united in the memory of the 2 young children who died last week. 2 young children, 2 brothers, 3 and 5 years of age. They lived much less time than it will take us to forget their memory. We were there to support their mother, their family, who will never be able to experience the joys of seeing these children grow, thrive, live. As always, the inhabitants of Wendake are standing up together in their pain, in their courage. But this tragedy did not only occur in Wendake. We've seen similar tragedies in Saint-Apollinaire, in Granby. And as human beings, we should all care about these tragedies. No one can be sheltered from an incident like this one. No one is safe. And that is why we all need to be attentive to the sufferings of others. An inquiry was launched. Justice will follow its course, but justice can never give these 2 children their lives back. As a friend said to me yesterday, let us avoid another tragedy like this one. That is what we hope. That is what we hope and wish for very deeply. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Brampton North.
Mr. Speaker, last month, Canadians across Canada, and especially in my riding of Brampton North, were blown away by 11-year-old Roberta Battaglia's powerful voice and even more powerful message. Competing in America's Got Talent, Roberta inspired us all as she spoke out against bullying in schools while performing a song incredible enough to receive Judge Sofia Vergara's only golden buzzer. This recognition of talent sent Roberta straight to the finals, where our Brampton star won 4th place, impressing both judges and the audience. To make her performance even more meaningful, Roberta chose to sing a song by Alessia Cara, who is not only Canadian, but from Brampton as well. These are just 2 examples of the magnitude of talent that exists within Brampton, and I applaud every person who is working hard to achieve their dreams. Roberta is an inspiration to us all, and I wish her best of luck in her musical career.
The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. Mr. Speaker, it's a great pleasure for me to highlight the contribution of Raymond Petra, a constituent in Hull-Aylmer who has been volunteering and working in my community for over 51 years. He took his retirement at the age of 89. He was chair of the Optimist Club in Aylmer in recent years. Before he agreed to do that in 2016, the future of the club was uncertain. But he believed in the club's mission to develop the best of our young people. And thanks to his dedication, leadership, and skills in management, the future of the club is now secure. I have known him for a while, and I would like to add that he's always in a good mood and very persuasive. He's a really strong individual. Raymond, thank you for all these years of dedication and working with young people in the community. Have a good, well-deserved retirement.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, for a month, Conservatives have been warning the government about rising tensions in Nova Scotia. This morning, the Minister of Public Safety compared the current situation to a war zone in need of peacekeeping. The government has ignored this issue. The Minister of Fisheries has refused to take her responsibility to Indigenous and commercial fishermen seriously. And now, instead of sending in negotiators a month ago, the government has to send in police officers. Mr. Speaker, when will the minister finally do her job before more people get hurt?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me join the Leader of the Official Opposition, and I think all members of this House, and indeed the vast majority of Canadians, in condemning the appalling violence that has taken place. Federal and provincial ministers are working together on solutions to maintain the peace and avoid any further violence. I'm sure we all agree on the need for all parties to engage in respectful dialogue aimed at upholding the Marshall Decision and the Mi'kmaq Treaty right to fish while ensuring conservation and sustainability of the fishery.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, leadership means acting before people get hurt. Ce gouvernement choisit.
This government always picks the wrong decision in leadership, the worst option. In Nova Scotia, the situation is increasingly serious because this Prime Minister and the Minister take action very slowly. For months, the Conservatives have been asking for mediation. Today, it's the police who are on the ground. Will the Minister of Fisheries have the leadership to resolve this issue, or will we still have to wait? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we condemn the terrible violence that has taken place. The federal and provincial ministers are working together on solutions to maintain peace and avoid any new violence. It is essential for all parties to be respectful and respect the Marshall Decision, as well as the Mi'kmaq Treaty, while ensuring the conservation and sustainability of the fishery. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, another week, another provocation from China, and like always, it's the government, the Liberal government has the status quo. The Chinese ambassador threatened the 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong. It's worse today because the Chinese government has said that Canada must apologize. Will the Prime Minister finally protect Canadians and stand up to China? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our position on human rights and freedoms, freedom of expression, is quite clear. As with regard to the situation in Hong Kong, the Minister of Foreign Affairs took measures to clarify and share Canada's official position on the ambassador's comments, and I would highlight that the government's decisions when it comes to immigration will be taken only by Canada. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, as this government is too timid to act. Last week, the Chinese ambassador threatened 300,000 Canadians currently living in Hong Kong. He has offered no public apology, and this government hasn't demanded one. This morning, we learned that the Chinese government has actually doubled down and are complaining about our reaction to their threat. Mr. Speaker, will the government finally demand that the Chinese ambassador apologize to Canadians publicly in the same way that he publicly threatened them?
Well, Deputy Prime Minister.
Let me be very clear. Our government is clear and outspoken in our defense of human rights and free speech in Canada and around the world. That is why we have been steadfast in defending the protests in Hong Kong and the 300,000 Canadians who live there, and in protesting the treatment of the Uyghurs. And let me just say, the recent comments by the Chinese ambassador are not in any way in keeping with the spirit of appropriate diplomatic relations between two countries. And let me also add that Canada's decisions will be made by Canadians.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing that remains clear is this Prime Minister's continued admiration for the basic dictatorship in China. This morning, the Chinese ambassador took his comments a step further. He's issued another vague threat against Canada if Parliament dares to condemn the ethnic cleansing against Muslim Uyghurs in Western China. Canadians in Hong Kong have been threatened. This House has now been threatened, Mr. Speaker. Who else has to be threatened by the ambassador before the Prime Minister is willing to pull his credentials?
Well, Deputy Prime Minister.
let me be very clear. I am well aware of the character of authoritarian communist regimes. I have lived in one and reported on it. And let me also be clear that when it comes to the treatment of the Uyghurs, an ethnic Muslim minority which is being persecuted, Canada will always speak out clearly and without any reservation. And let me also assure the Canadians, the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong, that a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and we will stand with them.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the government is so intent on ensuring we don't get to the bottom of the WE scandal that it's prepared to fall, if need be, if there's a vote on creating a special committee on the issue. In the middle of a pandemic and the second wave, it's threatening the opposition parties with going to an election because it doesn't want to hear about the WE Charity anymore. This summer, they shut down Parliament so we would stop talking about the WE Charity, and now it's prepared to have an election to make us stop talking about it. It's very worrying. What do they have to hide? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are facing a global pandemic which has created the greatest economic crisis since the Second World War. It is important for MPs to look at the government's expenditures, and that is why the Leader of the government in the House proposed a reasonable solution to his counterparts to start the work. I hope that all the parties will work together in order to find a reasonable way forward. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals want to create a COVID costing committee. We fully agree with that. We're talking about $300 billion, but they gave $912 million to an organization that left Canada once it lost the contract. There are so many questions about it, but we can do both at the same time instead of threatening the opposition parties. Why don't they accept the creation of a committee that will look in full at the WE Charity? The Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, let me remind you of the facts. More than 5,000 pages of the document were provided to the Committee of Finance. The Prime Minister made public today his honorariums. His chief of staff and other officials have appeared before the committee to testify on the issue. Mr. Speaker, that is transparency. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Liberal and Conservatives have failed the Mi'kmaq. And now the Mi'kmaq are facing violence, crime, and intimidation. At the same time, the Prime Minister is standing by. When will the Prime Minister protect the Mi'kmaq and their constitutional rights and put an end to violence? The Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for this very important question. Our government strongly condemns the violent actions that have recently taken place in Nova Scotia. We have approved a request for assistance from the province in order to increase our RCMP officers as needed. These acts of violence will be investigated fully, and those responsible will have to answer for their actions.
South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This isn't a new problem. The government has known about this problem for decades, and both Conservative and Liberal governments have failed the Mi'kmaq people. And as a result, we've all seen the horrible images of fires being set to facilities, traps being cut, intimidation, and assault. Now, while all this has happened, the Prime Minister has stood by idly and not acted. Leadership is stepping up. When will the Prime Minister step up, protect the Mi'kmaq people, their constitutional right, and end the violence?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me just thank the member opposite for the question and say I very much agree with him that Canada has, for decades, for centuries, failed the Indigenous people in Canada, and it is time for us to put this right. We condemn the appalling violence that has taken place, and let me say I believe the vast majority of Canadians feel exactly that way. I think we all also agree on the need for all parties to engage in respectful dialogue aimed at upholding the Marshall Decision and the Mi'kmaq Treaty right to fish while ensuring the conservation and sustainability of the fishery. Let's work for that, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, more than a month ago, Conservatives asked the Prime Minister to de-escalate the Nova Scotia fisheries crisis. The Indigenous Services Minister even said police are, quote, being overwhelmed. But still no action, just tweets. In fact, the Public Safety Minister said it was the province's problem. Things literally burned to the ground before the minister looked into sending additional police resources to Nova Scotia. Chief Mike Sack said, quote, do your job, protect us, and don't just tweet about it. My question to the minister is simple. Why did he wait so long?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, let me begin by reiterating that our government absolutely condemns the recent acts of violence and criminality that have been taking place in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP have continued to increase their presence with each passing day, and they are investigating and laying charges for the unacceptable assault on Chief Sack, for the damage and the arsons that have taken place. And we did respond to a request for assistance from the province of Nova Scotia. We're working very closely with the provincial authorities there on the ground to ensure that all acts of violence will be thoroughly investigated, perpetrators will be held to account, and the peace will be maintained.
Member for Lakeland.
Right, so he finally did act by responding to that request, even after he first said that they couldn't possibly do anything about it and actually respond. And more than 200 people overwhelmed police last Tuesday. Vehicles and boats were lit on fire as early as the week before. The situation didn't suddenly just spiral out of control. It's been going on for more than a month. Colin Sproul of the Fundy Inshore Fishermen's Association said this Liberal government is, quote, hiding under a desk. The reality is the Public Safety Minister dithered, while livelihoods and decades of relationship building went up in flames. And here, more words tonight in a potential debate, it's too little, too late. Why is that waiting for the worst to happen is this minister's approach to protecting Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's very important to understand the responsibility of the police of jurisdiction, and in this case the RCMP, to maintain the peace, and they have deployed officers from the very first day, both at land and on the water. They've been working with the Canadian Coast Guard, responding to an escalating conflict in that area. And we have continued to increase resources, and at the request of the Nova Scotia government, have now significantly enhanced those resources. The police have an important job to do in maintaining the peace, and where acts of criminality take place, to thoroughly investigate and hold those individuals responsible to account. They're doing that job, and we've ensured that they have the resources to do it effectively.
Member for Lakeland.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the minister actually has an important job to do. So maybe instead of waiting and blaming others and not doing anything about it, he should actually get on it. It seems that his usual practice is to just ignore an issue and hope it goes away until he's forced to actually do something. He waited until people were assaulted and buildings were set on fire to give the RCMP additional resources in Nova Scotia. But of course, that's his pattern, even in their grief and their horrible loss. Loved ones and families of the Nova Scotia mass murder had to fight and fight to beg him to have a public inquiry. Why does this minister always wait until things escalate so far before doing something?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear that the police of jurisdiction in this case have been present right from the very first day. They have been working with both sides of this conflict. There are divisional liaison teams in place, which include Mi'kmaq officers who have been working with that situation to try to resolve it. When incidents of criminality take place, the police immediately began investigations. They've gathered the evidence and they've done their job. Mr. Speaker, our government's responsibility is to ensure, working with the provincial authority, that they have the necessary resources in place to keep that situation peaceable and under control, and to uphold the laws. We've done that, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Lakeland.
But I asked about the public inquiry into the horrible mass murder in Nova Scotia on behalf of the victims' families and their loved ones. It's 6 months today since that mass murder occurred. This minister made families of the victims fight and fight before he agreed to a public inquiry, but it still hasn't begun, and it's ridiculous. There are many experts out there who could sit as commissioners. These guys don't need to wait for another Liberal just to replace Anne McClellan. When will this public inquiry start so that families and communities in Nova Scotia can get the answers they deserve? And why on earth is this minister waiting so friggin' long?
The Honourable Minister.
And Mr. Speaker, and in fact, in the hours after the terrible tragedy on April 18th and 19th in Nova Scotia, I reached out to the Nova Scotia government and we began doing the work that was necessary together to ensure that Nova Scotians and particularly the families of those victims got the answers that they need. We have put in place the structure of a public inquiry and appointed commissioners. We've established a secretariat and resourced it. That work is already underway, and we'll have more to say about it as the week unfolds. But, Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to ensuring that the families receive all of the answers to the concerns that they legitimately have. Thank you.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
Sorry for my language, Mr. Speaker, but loved ones and families of murder victims, their whole lives are impacted forever. On August 25th, U.S. business executives came to Canada on a private jet and were granted quarantine exemption, which the minister said was a one-time mistake that shouldn't have happened. But it was just found out that on the exact same day, other big-shot U.S. executives came to Canada on their private jets and were permitted to travel the country freely. Canadians face restrictions and quarantines in their own country, but the Liberals just keep granting exemptions to American billionaires. Why are there always one set of rules for connected elites and another set for everyday working Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, and our government has taken unprecedented action over the past several months to prevent the introduction and spread of COVID-19 in non-essential travel restrictions. Mr. Speaker, just to correct a mistake that the member has made repeatedly in this House, there were no ministerial exemptions provided and no ministerial involvement in the decision pertaining to these executives or the one reported yesterday. And in fact, following that decision and on the same day, I raised the concerns expressed with the president of CBSA. He instantly implemented additional measures. And, Mr. Speaker, that updated guidance is working. The agency has denied cases of entry by executives intending to enter Canada for discretionary travel. We'll continue to do the work of keeping Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Des-Chemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, we know that border management by the Liberals is a real cock-off, and yet the pandemic has come through there. American billionaires have been able to come in and visit the three epicenters of the pandemic in the country. Why a double standard? Why are Canadians in quarantine and American billionaires are not having to quarantine?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take the opportunity, if I may, to just announce to this House that we have today extended the non-essential travel restrictions until November 21st, and I'm sure that's welcome news. I would also reiterate once again to the member opposite that this was a decision that was based, the decision of admissibility based by border service officers on the information that was provided to them. As a direct result, I've spoken to the president of CBSA. They've implemented additional measures to prevent such future instances of this type, and their guidance that has been provided by the president of CBSA is working. Mr. Speaker, the agency continues to deny access for entry executives intending to travel for discretionary purposes.
The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister himself recognized that the federal government does not have the experience to manage long-term care homes. He's right. It's our healthcare professionals in Quebec who do. His role is to ensure adequate funding of healthcare transfers to fund the healthcare in Quebec. But the federal government has been cutting transfers for 25 years. What happened in the long-term care homes is the result of 25 years of federal negligence. Instead of being a stage manager after 25 years of negligence, why doesn't he increase transfers? The Honourable Minister of Health.
I thank my honourable colleague for such an important question about the role the federal government has to support provinces and territories, in particular during the COVID-19 outbreak. I will remind the member opposite that we negotiated $19 billion of support for provinces and territories, of which $700 million was to bolster supports in long-term care homes to protect seniors from what we saw happen in the spring surge. I'll also remind the member opposite that we didn't hesitate to support through direct service through Canadian Red Cross, one of our important partners, and certainly through the Canadian military to protect seniors. And we'll continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, no matter which province those seniors reside.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Visibly, we'll have to remind the government of the following. Do you know who in the Quebec healthcare system takes care of seniors? Attendants, nurses, doctors. Quebecers are not being taken care of by pan-Canadian standards. Rather, it is people who get a salary and who need to be provided with the necessary resources. Our healthcare professionals know how to do their jobs, and they want the means to do so with dignity. Quebec and the provinces are asking for money, not lessons. Why is the government refusing to increase federal healthcare transfers and to do so now unconditionally? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, the Bloc is mixing things up. I've said it again, it's not about jurisdiction or constitutional texts when it comes to seniors. We want to take care of them more than anyone else during the pandemic. We want to improve the situation. We're not telling Quebec what to do. We're working with Quebec and the provinces to ensure that this never occurs again. The Honourable Member for Montarville. Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister said that the drama that unfolded in the long-term care homes was an opportunity for the federal government. Mr. Speaker, an opportunity to interfere in provincial jurisdiction. Caring for seniors during a pandemic is not an opportunity, it's a duty, and this government is not fulfilling that duty. Its job is to increase federal health care transfers to a level that will allow people to be cared for with dignity. Why is it not taking the opportunity to do what it's supposed to do? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House. Mr. Speaker, a day without no constitutional quabbles is not a good day for the Bloc. We have to work with all of the provinces in order to improve the situation for all our seniors. We're talking about saving lives. We're talking here about improving health care. People who have suffered too much. I think everybody agrees on that, Mr. Speaker. And once again, our seniors should never be at the heart of a constitutional debate, but rather be seen for what they are, human beings. And they should live in a society that we have.
For Carlton.
With Canada having the highest unemployment in the G7 and the highest deficit in the G20, you'd think Liberal Finance Committee members would be rushing to work on fixing the economic wreckage. Instead, they spent 20 hours filibustering to cover up the WE scandal, rambling on about Greek philosophers and cartoon characters just to pass the time. Conservatives have a solution. Let's take the WE scandal out of the Finance Committee into a special purpose anti-corruption committee so that finance can get back to its job. Will they support us so that we can get back to our work?
Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, last night I sent a motion to my colleagues from the other parties. This morning I sent a letter talking about the creation of this committee that could see all the expenses made by the government, because we made a lot of efforts to be there and to support Canadians, Mr. Speaker. I think that's the responsible approach, not the ultra-partisan motion that is there only to please the Conservative parties and that does nothing for Canadians.
Well, member for Carlton.
Mais c'est encore des menaces.
But it's still threats. We remember in the summer the Prime Minister said, well, if you're asking questions about the scandal, we'll shut down Parliament. Months later, we're back. And now he said, if you continue to ask questions, we're going to call an election, because we want to avoid at all costs for this scandal to be something that Canadians are aware of. My question is this: what is the secret, the bad secret and dangerous secret that for which the Prime Minister needs to call an election? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, we're in the middle of a pandemic and a very difficult health situation, and the government must focus its energies on that. And the government has proposed to the opposition to create a committee where we could all work and ask the questions that need to be asked. But this is the difference between an ultra-partisan committee, which seeks to stall the government, Mr. Speaker. That would be irresponsible. They should join us and ask the right questions and continue to be there for Canadians.
Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has shown that he'll stop at nothing to protect his secrets, and that's why we had the cover-up prorogation. That's why we've had days and days of filibusters with Liberal members reading the newspaper into the record and PCO memos trying to put us to sleep.
Mr. Speaker, the filibuster continues. The secrets must be damning. What we need to know, when will this Prime Minister release the documents and end the cover-up?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, if they want to have a committee and ask all the questions that they want, we have a solution for them. I've sent a note to the House leaders last night, a letter more detailed this morning. There's an option for all of us to work together so they can do and ask all the questions that they want. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, the government has to keep working for Canadians, and the government will keep working for Canadians in spite of what they want to do.
The Honourable Member for Churchill-Kiewit-Newcastle.
Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on the airline industry. Routes cut, massive layoffs, and customers ripped off. Countries around the world facing the same challenges have shown leadership and put in place solutions, including taking on an equity stake to protect the public interest. But not Canada. It's not about helping CEOs. It's about protecting Canadian jobs and making sure passengers get their money back. When will this government stop dithering and commit to a rescue package that includes public equity, job protection, and consumer protection that the NDP has been calling for?
The Honourable Minister.
I want to assure my colleague and indeed all Canadians that we are working very hard. We recognize that there have been great difficulties in the air sector, including airlines and airports, and we are working on solutions that will ensure that Canadians are able to have safe, reliable, and efficient travel when we pull out of this pandemic.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, Liberals are hoping their scandal will go away quickly. Instead, it's the help they promised to students that's disappeared. They promised close to $1 billion to help students pay for their tuition fees, rent, and groceries. But after 7 months of broken promises and scandal, students have gotten nothing. The Liberals have denied Canadians access to the truth and are denying students access to post-secondary education. Do students also need to hire a Prime Minister's family member to get the help that they need from this government?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government will continue to be here for students, and that's why we have a full voice at the cabinet table. Since the pandemic hit, over 700,000 students have been supported through the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. We doubled the amount of Canada student grants for full and part-time students. We instituted a 6-month moratorium on Canada student loans, which includes the payment as well as interest. There's a new investment of $186 million in the Student Work Placement Program to help more post-secondary students across the government get paid work experience related to their field of study. We increased funding for First Nations, Inuit, Métis students for post-secondary funding. Our government will continue.
Honourable Member for Lac St. Louis.
Speech reiterated the government's commitment to creating a Canada Water Agency to help protect our most precious resource. Last week, I had the opportunity to be a panelist on a webinar designed to gather input from the water stakeholder community for the design of the agency. We know the agency will be a work in progress, informed by the ongoing advice of water experts and other stakeholders. Can the Minister of the Environment inform the House of the steps he is currently undertaking to lay the foundation for the Canada Water Agency?
Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Lac St. Louis for his question. With 20% of the world's fresh water, including 2 million lakes and rivers, Canada has a great responsibility to manage its water sustainably and ensure that it will be available for generations to come. The Canada Water Agency can play a key role in keeping our water safe, clean, and resilient to the impacts of climate change. It is critical that a Canada Water Agency is developed in close collaboration with the provinces, territories, Indigenous peoples, stakeholder organizations, and the public. Together, these consultations will help us define the role and the mandate of the Canada Water Agency, and I look forward to sharing our next steps on this important initiative in the near future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to know why the Liberals chose to shut down Canada's early pandemic warning system and what impact it had on the spread of COVID-19 in Canada. I would like to know why rapid testing for COVID won't be widely available in Canada until well into next year. We've been trying to get secret documents related to these issues for 10 days now, and the government has blocked us at every turn. At a time when Canadians are suffering the effects of the Liberals failing to prepare for the second wave, why are the Liberals more interested in covering their rears instead of protecting Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the question, and I'd like to let the member opposite know that any time that she wants to receive a briefing from the department on where we're at with COVID-19 now, to learn a little bit more about Canada's response and the support that we've been providing to provinces and territories as we work through this together, I can make that happen for her. Mr. Speaker, ever since the beginning of the pandemic, we've worked with scientists, with our public health officers to make sure that Canada is well situated to respond to COVID-19. I want to thank all of the hardworking scientists, researchers, and of course our Chief Public Health Officer for the excellent advice and guidance that they've provided to us.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
What a patronizing answer. You know, I've had that briefing and it was less than illuminating. I've been standing here for days asking the minister questions with no answers. I'm convinced she doesn't know. So what am I doing? My job. Trying to get these documents, bring them to light so that the public has answers. And what do the Liberals do? Block us at every turn. We need this information so we can find out how to move forward, how to keep things open and keep Canadians safe. When are the government going to get out of our way and let us get these documents?
Full Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that every step of the way we've worked with partners at all levels, whether it's municipalities, provinces, territories, in fact, with private sector partners to make sure that Canada is well poised to deal with the second wave and whatever else COVID-19 throws at us. I reiterate my offer to the member opposite that if she wants to learn a little bit more about the COVID-19 response, that she takes us up on the offer of those briefings. Thank you.
The honourable member for Charlebourg, Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, 12 young activists from Hong Kong were arrested as they were trying to leave Hong Kong and are now in prison in communist China. These young people were bravely fighting for democracy and were trying to escape blatant human rights violations in China. Moreover, China's ambassador to Canada has had the nerve to directly threaten the safety of Canadians in Hong Kong. When will the minister publish a clear plan to help pro-democracy refugees from Canada and for the 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada stands shoulder to shoulder with the people of Hong Kong. As we have repeatedly said, we are gravely concerned about China's passage of the national security law. We have an asylum system that is the envy of the world. We will continue to defend those who are seeking safe haven in Canada by offering them the opportunity to make that case in Canada, and we will continue to examine all options to stand with the people of Hong Kong.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the government has discovered that their appeasement of the People's Republic of China is deeply unpopular with Canadians. So now they're trying to sound tougher while changing absolutely nothing in reality. Now, this minister has real power. It's not about how he feels, it's about what he will do. The government could implement a real lifeboat scheme. They could hold diplomats accountable for foreign interference. They could impose Magnitsky sanctions on those who are involved in gross violations of human rights in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, and elsewhere. Verbal machismo will not fool Canadians and will not help people in Hong Kong. Words are not enough. When will the minister act?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government has already taken action by suspending our extradition treaty with Hong Kong, by imposing other sanctions, and by continuing to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Hong Kong. And that includes as well standing up for those Canadians who are there. We will continue to defend human rights around the world. We have an asylum system that ensures that those who are seeking safe refuge in Canada are able to exercise that right in Canada. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Hong Kong.
The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, 7 months after shutting the borders, Ottawa has just realized that airline customers who bought plane tickets want to be refunded. For 7 months now, the Bloc has repeated this, and they're finally listening. But the airline should be the ones to pay, not taxpayers. We've heard that the government may be ready to give financial support to Air Canada and WestJet. Before giving them anything, can the government make them refund the customers first? No refund, no funding. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to reassure my honourable colleague and all Canadians that we're working very hard on this file for the airline industry, which was hit heavily by this pandemic. But at the same time, I can assure him that our priority is to ensure that Canadians have proper service with airline service that is safe, effective, and affordable. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is on the verge of helping Air Canada and WestJet, but it's the entire airline industry that is in danger here. Will they help Air Transit, which is on the brink of bankruptcy? What will they do for our regional airlines? Mr. Speaker, Ottawa's support for this industry needs to be comprehensive and not only benefit Air Canada. Will they support everyone, or are they just purchasing shares in Air Canada's future monopoly at the expense of the competition? The Honourable Minister. You're on mute, Minister.
Je m'excuse.
Sorry. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to reassure my colleague, when I say that we're examining the airline industry, we're doing this on an overall basis, both small and large airlines and small airports and larger ones. NAVCAN is responsible for controlling the airfields. We're controlling everything overall because we have to address this sector comprehensively to find the right solutions.
For Desnate, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Thank you, Speaker. Housing and health infrastructure and reserves across Canada leave many First Nations vulnerable to contracting and spreading COVID-19. The government likes to promote the fact that they have gene expert machines available, but failed to mention that a shortage of cartridges means that only the most urgent cases can be tested in the communities. Other swabs are sent away and take days for the results to be returned. Why did the government not act quickly to procure enough test cartridges to ensure First Nations and indeed all Canadians had access to these rapid tests?
Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, and I've worked very closely with my counterpart, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, and of course with their expert medical advisor, Dr. Thomas Wong, who has been very focused on making sure that Indigenous communities have what they need to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Very early on, as the member opposite noted, we ensured that Indigenous communities had gene expert machines so they could do a number of tests locally. Of course, we worked with them to make sure that they had the supports necessary to put into place, through the spirit of self-determination, Mr. Speaker, the kinds of measures that would protect their citizens. We'll continue to work with Indigenous communities because their leadership is showing that it's working. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Mr. Speaker, for more than 2 years now, we've been waiting for the Official Languages Act to be modernized. And for more than 2 years, we've been talking about studies and consultations and reports. Organizations have done what they have to, and the Official Languages Commissioner has done so as well. In his 2019 report, there were 18 recommendations. How many were applied, Mr. Speaker? None. Why is the minister refusing to present a timetable for the modernization of the Official Languages Act? The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Our two official languages, of course, are very important, and that is why we took action. We protected the first French university in Ontario and participated in the creation of a historic action plan. Also, we recently modified the census so that we could look at rights holders. At all levels, we took action. And we are working on the modernization of the OLA. That is why in the throne speech, we did announce that we would move forward with this, and we will do so. Thank you.
For Bruce Gray, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, many small businesses and Canadian farmers are still having difficulty accessing the Canadian Emergency Business Account. The government finally committed to fixing these shortfalls on August 31st after many months of opposition members asking for these changes. However, as of this morning, the CEBA website still states businesses which choose to do their banking through a personal bank account are not eligible to apply for a CEBA loan. After receiving no justification for being declined and waiting on the so-called CEBA hotline for 6 to 8 hours, businesses and farmers want answers. When will the government implement these promised changes?
Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for that really good question. And to small businesses and to farming businesses, nothing is more important to us than helping you get through this very difficult time of the COVID-19. I just learned that the hotline, the response time is within 48 hours, and many businesses are getting their answers right away, under 48 hours, but absolutely no more than 48 hours. We want to make sure that the CBRA loan is getting out to all those businesses that need it. Thank you so much.
L'honorable député. The honourable member for Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, this week is Small Business Week, and we'd like to underscore their importance for our country. They are at the very heart of the Canadian economy. They employ millions of Canadians across the country. COVID-19 has made things very tough for most small businesses in Canada, and our government knows this, and this is why, since the outset, we created programs to help employers and small businesses. Can the Minister tell the House how we will once again help Canadian companies during the second wave of the pandemic? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, during this Small Business Week, I'd like to thank the member for her ongoing support for SMEs. We are supporting our small businesses by extending the wage subsidy, and we're helping with fixed costs with our new rent assistance program for tenants, and by extending CEBA to help companies and giving an extra $20,000.
Member for Niagara Falls. Mr. Speaker, on June 30th, the two bridge authorities, which operate the 4 international border crossings in the Niagara region, sent a joint letter to multiple ministers in this Liberal government. As these bridges have been hit hard by COVID-19, they requested assistance no different than support currently being made available to airports, as a simple matter of fairness. 16 weeks later, none of these ministers have even acknowledged receipt of this letter, despite the important role these bridges played. Why is the government not taking this critical issue in the Niagara region seriously?
Minister for Infrastructure.
It's always great to talk about our infrastructure program. We're building projects across the country, thousands of projects, creating jobs across the country, improving communities. We're going to continue to do that. I'm certainly happy to talk to the member opposite on particular issues, but we're going to continue building our great country.
The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest. The honourable member, I believe you're on mute, if you might want to check that out. Seem to be having a problem with that. Try that again. Nope. We'll move on to the next one and then come back. In the meantime, we'll get the IT department to work on it. The honourable member for Dauphin Swan River.
Mr. Speaker, millions of rural Canadians do not have access to quality cell phone service. This is an urgent matter of public safety. Earlier this year, destructive flooding and tornadoes threatened my constituency, most notably in the communities of Minnedosa, Rapid City, Rivers, and Neepawa. Many were unable to contact emergency service, putting their lives at risk. Mr. Speaker, when will this government finally prioritize rural connectivity? Will it be before or after another Canadian loses their life?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as a Member of Parliament for a mixed rural-urban riding, I am too familiar with the challenges that come without access to broadband and cell service. As a Member of Parliament in this House over the past 5 years, I am proud that we've been able to connect 4 times as many households as our Conservative colleagues were able to do in the 10 years that they were in power. We know this is an important part of Canada's economic recovery, and we will work hard to connect every Canadian household to this essential service.
The honourable member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians recognize that our TV and film industry is a vital driver of economic activity and jobs, including right here in Etobicoke Lakeshore, which is home to the largest film studio in Canada and the largest equipment supplier in the country. The industry has been hit hard by this pandemic. COVID-19 has caused a shutdown of film sets in Canada and around the world. Given the current situation, the industry fears that it will not be able to fully resume operations. The Minister of Canadian Heritage has listened to the concerns of Canadian cultural workers and adjusted programs to ensure that they are better suited to their needs. Can the minister tell us what our government is doing to help the audiovisual industry?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the member for Parliament for Etobicoke Lakeshore. Our government is proud to support the Canadian film industry as they play an important role in the social, cultural, and economic development of our country. We are taking challenges faced by the audiovisual sector very seriously, and this is why we recently announced a short-term compensation program to remunerate the lack of insurance and allow the resumption of audiovisual production activities across the country. This program will provide $50 million in the short-term funding that will be administered by Telefilm Canada, along with the Canada Media Fund. This measure will, among other things, keep tens of thousands of workers and artisans at work and generate hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, the governing United Conservative Party of Alberta has voted in favour of privatizing health care. Despite a guarantee during his election campaign to maintain public health care, Jason Kenney is gutting our publicly delivered, universally accessible health care. Once the Conservatives destroy public health care in Alberta, which province is next? What is the minister doing to protect Canadians from two-tiered American-style health care in Alberta and across Canada? And what is she doing to make sure that premiers are adhering to the Canada Health Act?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I share the member opposite's deep concern about a Conservative Party that would seek to undermine the principle of our universal health care system, which is, by the way, the need for health care rather than the ability to pay. On this side of the House, we will fight to ensure that we protect something that all Canadians treasure, which is access to health care that is there for you regardless of your income, regardless of your ability to pay, and we will stop at nothing to do so. Thank you.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The name Donald Marshall Jr. will always be remembered in Canada as synonymous with systemic racism and injustice. 11 years in prison for a crime he did not commit, and then as a free man, he fished for eels out of season, relying on his constitutional rights. That case got to the Supreme Court of Canada 21 years ago, finding the right of the Mi'kmaq to a fishery. How is it in this country that when there's never any shortage of well-equipped RCMP officers to arrest Indigenous nonviolent protesters against pipelines in British Columbia, but no one to protect the Indigenous catch in a warehouse in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for her question and let her know that this matter is top of mind for our government. The violence that we have seen, our government will continue to condemn it. We will work with all departments and agencies. We know that the Marshall decision needs to be upheld, and that's why we will ensure that it is. We are working with a nation-to-nation relationship to ensure that we find a good way forward. And as the Deputy Prime Minister has said, majority of Canadians recognize the importance of this issue. We are working on it, and we will continue to do this important work. I thank the member for bringing it, once again, raising this matter to everyone's attention.
Now we're going to give another shot with the honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest. See how that works. Hopefully we got... Go ahead.
I'll try this, Mr. Speaker.
Perfect.
Any luck? Wonderful. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Environment Minister told me to read over his new jobs-killing plan to declare Canada's plastic manufacturers toxic. The minister should take his own advice. This important industry employs over 80,000 blue-collar workers across Canada, generating $35 billion of economic activity. And according to the World Economic Forum, 90% of global plastic pollution comes from 10 river sources. None are in Canada. So how big a hit will Canadian paychecks and our economy take on a Liberal plan that exports jobs and ignores real polluters?
Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would again invite my honourable colleague to actually read the plan. The focus is on ensuring that we are not ending up with plastics in our landfills and plastics in our waters. It is about recycling, enhancing the recycling rate of plastics across this country. It is also about ensuring that we are banning the 6 items that are on the list with respect to those that are harmful to the environment and those for which there are readily available alternatives and those for which recycling is not an available option. So This is really about ensuring that we are protecting the environment, but it's also about growing an economy that's based on ensuring that we are actually using the materials that are in our economy in a thoughtful way, moving towards circularity in everything we do.
And that's all the time we have today. C'est tout ce qu'on a. We have a point of order for the honourable member for Hull Aylmer, who is online. Okay. The honourable member for Hull Aylmer. We'll go to the honourable member for Sherwood Park for Fort Saskatchewan, and then we'll come back to the honourable member for Hull Aylmer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I don't know if there was a technical issue with the sound coming across. In response to my question, the Minister for Immigration referred to sanctions that Canada has on China. I checked the Foreign Affairs website. We have no sanctions on China of any kind against any officials right now. I wonder if the Minister wants to clarify his comments on it.
I believe that's getting into debate, but we'll give the equal amount of time to the Minister if he wants to clarify that. No, that's fine. We'll go back to the honourable member for Hull Aylmer. Seem to be having some technical difficulties. The Honourable Minister of Immigration, you've got 10 seconds. No? You're good? Okay. Pursuant to order made on Tuesday, September 29th, 2020, I wish to inform the House that a communication from Joe Pescisolido was received as follows on Tuesday, October 13th, 2020. Dear Mr. Speaker, thank you for allowing me the opportunity, as I would like to apologize to the House for reporting